Digital Marketing Radio, episode 91, Audio Recording Equipment.
DigitalMarketingRadio.com.
I'm David Bain, and this is Digital Marketing Radio, weekly interviews with digital marketing experts. Find out about everything we do at DigitalMarketingRadio.com.
The big interview with David Bain.
So today I'm joined by Colin Gray. Colin, welcome to DMR.
Thanks very much for having me.
Excellent. Okay, well, Colin is a podcast and online educator. He's been teaching podcasting skills for over 6 years now, and you can find him over at thepodcasthost.com. So, Colin, you're a highly experienced audio professional. So what piece of equipment would you say you have personally that probably has the biggest impact on the quality of audio that you can actually produce?
I think the bit of equipment I always tell people to think about first is the microphone. It seems a bit obvious, but it's true. It's the bit that picks up your voice. It's the bit that actually translates your analog waves that are vibrating through the air into something digital, so it captures it into the computer. So that's the place to start, I think, when you're trying to increase your audio quality. And these days, I'm speaking on an MXL 990, which is a great little condenser mic, and actually, there's a lot of people talk about there's sort of lots of debate over what the best microphones are, and the MXL is not actually mentioned very often, but I'm surprised because it's really good value. It's under £100 in the UK, and it's excellent quality. It's one of my favourite things. It's definitely the thing that sort of stepped up my quality when I first got that.
It certainly sounds great, and of course we're recording this both on video, so to be seen on YouTube, but also audio as well. And it'll be quite interesting actually if people play this on YouTube, but also listen to it on audio on digitalmarketingradio.com, because what we're hopefully going to do here is record what we call a double ender. So do you want to explain what a double ender is?
Yeah, sure. It's basically the way we combat terrible, awful, flaky Skype connections, where often you listen to an interview and you get the host is fine because he's recording on his own system, but obviously you're getting a terrible connection from the other side, so it can be really flaky and kind of drop out and stuff. So what we do is just get the other person to record their side as well, and then we bring the two files together, sync them up, and then suddenly it sounds like both are in the same studio.
Excellent. I'll have to prepare that kind of description myself as well. That was very succinct and very good. I tell you what, I was in Australia last year, and I was doing a bit of recording, but I was using a condenser microphone. And unfortunately, not really unfortunately, but I lived quite near the harbour in the centre, and the train went over a bridge just outside the apartment that I lived in, and I found that with a condenser microphone, although it produced a decent quality sound, I just struggled to get that background noise out of the final recording. Is that not a potential issue with condenser microphones?
It is, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's often one of the biggest questions you get. Once people figure out a little bit more about mics, then that's the next question that comes. It's more past which mic do I buy, it's suddenly do I get a dynamic or do I get a condenser? And really it comes down to what your recording environment's like. So if you're in a really noisy environment, like you've got trains going by, or even if you're just in a flat that's near the street and you have lorries or cars, or even if you're in a house which actually has a fridge in the next room, or your computer's particularly loud, a condenser mic essentially is super sensitive. It picks up a huge frequency range of sounds. It's the reason it does sound so good is because it does pick up such a big range of that audio in the room. But obviously, if you've got a noisy room, it's picking up all of that as well. So often, actually, I would recommend people, or when I talk to people about setting up their first little studio, they're just doing it in their bedroom. They're doing it in a noisy place, and therefore a dynamic mic is generally the best option because it still gives you a really good sound. You have to have your mic technique a little bit better, so you maybe have to get a bit closer to the mic. That helps your bass a little bit, that kind of stuff. But the dynamic will cut down the background noise. It's generally a bit more directional. So yeah, it's generally, if you're in a non-professional recording studio, the dynamic mic's the best option. But if you have a really nicely set up quiet room, then the condenser is going to give you a better sound.
Right. Okay. So I'm working from a home office here, and I thought the dynamic microphone was the direction that I'd want to go in. So I decided to go for the RE20, which is obviously a staple horse of radio in the United States, but
Hmm.
it's not really so common in the UK. And I think one of my concerns was that I didn't want too much of a radio type voice, yeah, a deep booming, more of a popular star, I suppose, in the United States,
Yeah.
voice for radio. Um, and I was hoping that this kind of microphone would be, as long as if I didn't put it through too much compression or add too much bass to it, a decent quality. Would you say that's a valid concern for me to have actually had?
Yeah, I think a lot of people worry about how they sound. Obviously, it's always the first concern. People worry about their voice being rubbish, or nobody likes the sound of their own voice, essentially. So people think about that first, and the type of mic you buy does have a big effect. That's the thing that always frustrates me actually about people arguing about the best mic. This is the best mic. That's the best mic. Really, it comes down to there's no best mic for everyone. It actually depends on what you sound like. And really, the best thing you can do is once you're moving up to the kind of the higher levels of kit, you want to be able to go out and head to a music shop and actually try out a bunch of microphones. Get yourself recording on 5 or 6 different mics in a music shop and hear what they sound like, because there will be one that will suit your voice the best, and it won't be the one that suits the next guy in the shop's voice the best. It'll be something completely different. So, for example, a lot of people really rave about the Heil, the
Mm.
Heil PR40. That's one of the kind of gold standards of podcasting, just because there's sort of 2 or 3 or 4 prominent guys in the US who use it, promote it, and it sounds great for their voice. But actually, there's a lot of other people it doesn't sound so good for. So you really need to get out there and try them out. And when you come to that radio voice effect, you're quite right to be kind of worried about that, I think, because it's kind of, I don't know, the radio and podcasting are a very different thing. Radio, it's quite obvious that the presenter is broadcasting to millions of people. The kind of That's transparent. The presenter talks about that. He talks about speaking to his audience. But you as a podcaster, one of the powers of podcasting is that you're speaking in a much more intimate way to your audience. You're speaking to the person that's listening, and you speak much more individually to them. So I think it's much more advantageous to have that kind of realistic effect, or you're just much more real, you're much more natural. So adding tons of compression, tons of EQ, basically tons of effects to your voice to make you sound really radio-like, it just sounds really artificial, and I think it ruins a little bit of that kind of that personal touch that you can have with your audience.
So where do you actually go after your microphone then? Do you go into a mixer, or is there perhaps some kind of additional gain that you try and put into the microphone before going into a mixer, or do you actually just go directly into a PC?
Depends what I'm doing actually. In the most simple form, I still record in a load of different ways. In the most simple form, I actually still record in my headset sometimes. So that's just a USB headset straight into the computer. That's just the way to get it done. It doesn't sound as good as the other setup, but you know what? It sounds fine if you've got a decent enough headset. So I do that sometimes still. Right now, I'm speaking into my sort of full mixer setup. So I've got the MXL into my Behringer mixer. And then that goes out of the mixer into my digital recorder, which is a Zoom H4n. So that's the full setup. But sometimes I will actually just put the mic straight into the recorder as well, because generally, if you don't need a piece of audio equipment in your chain, in the audio chain, you shouldn't have it there, because the more stuff you have in there, the more potential problems you're going to have, or the more interference that can come in. That's the thing that drives people in audio crazy. Sometimes you get this little buzz or this little hiss, or there's a little sound there that you just don't want there, and that is much more likely to happen the more things you have in your audio chain. So if I want a really perfect, the best quality I can get, I'll actually plug my MXL condenser straight into my H4n recorder, and then that means I've got the minimum possible components there that can go wrong, and I'll just have the mic straight into the recorder. So yeah, there's a few different ways to do it, I think.
I know, and every setup really, certainly if you get a little bit of technical understanding yourself, tends to be a little bit different. You end up testing things and turning certain buttons up and other buttons down, and then you hear a hiss in the background and you're wondering where that's coming from. It's hard to define that sometimes. I'm also using a cloud lifter, which is an extra little device that I have in between my microphone and the mixer. Because it's a microphone that doesn't produce that much volume-wise, going directly into a mixer. Sometimes you have to lift the levels before being able to do anything with it, really. So I think that was a device that I certainly found made it easier to retain the quality without pumping up the gain right to the top possible level on the mixer.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, they're quite common actually with dynamic mics. Is it a dynamic mic you're using yourself?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes, just because dynamic mics don't tend to have quite as much gain, as you say, or power, I suppose, as a condenser, because they're not powered essentially. So yeah, Cloud Lifter is a really nice little device actually, and I have to use one if I'm recording straight from my dynamic, which is an SM58. I use a Shure SM58.
Sure.
If I'm recording straight into my digital recorder when I'm out and about. So if I'm going to a conference or something like that, I can get away with it if I try, but yeah, it sounds a lot better if I put my SM58 through a Cloud Lifter type device and then into the recorder. So yeah, they're really handy little things.
Okay, and one little setup, or part of the setup that I found particularly challenging to begin with, was the fact that because I'm recording for YouTube and also recording the audio here as well, I've ended up using two external sound cards. So one for the audio coming from the computer, so basically recording yourself through that, and one for the audio that I'm sending to the computer, to YouTube. So it's possibly not the only setup, or obviously it isn't the only setup. There's so many different options there. Do you have an external sound card yourself, or do you just actually rely on the sound card inside your own computer?
Yeah, I just use the one actually. I've read of people doing exactly what you're doing. I think it's a good solution for some context, but I tend to just use a mixed minus setup on my mixer. So I've got one sound card, and all my audio goes into the mixer, including the Skype input. So that's the people that I'm interviewing, and then out of the mixer, I get just my side of the audio, including any effects and stuff like that, and that's back into the same sound card as the input. So it means I can get away with just having the one sound card. But yeah, I mean, there's like you say, there's tons of different ways of doing things.
And if you're out and about, you mentioned you've got the H4n, I've got the H5,
Sure.
very similar kind of devices.
Yeah.
Would you just take your that device and just use that to actually record someone when you're in a cafe or something like that, or would you actually plug a microphone into it and never just rely on the onboard microphone?
I've used the H5 and the H4 they both have really good internal mics, so you can get away with it. And if you've got a situation where you're trying to record, say, 3 or 4 people, so if you've got a group of people all sitting around a table and they're reasonably close together, then yeah, you can get away with just putting the H4n in the middle of the table and just turn it on, putting it onto the wide angle sort of capture. But if I have the chance, I always take a mic with me. So I'll quite often take my SM58 and another general microphone like that. So I'll have me holding one and give one to, well, actually, I was about to say give one to the other person, but actually more often than not, you end up holding both because other people don't tend to be able to or remember to hold it close enough to their mouth. So you end up holding both microphones and then suddenly stuffing your recorder into your pocket or something like that so you can manage it. But so either I'll do that, or actually I'll take a couple of lapel mics, and that's a lapel mic's just a type of mic that clips onto your shirt. It's the type of little thing that you'll often see, maybe people being interviewed on the telly or that type of thing, and they're really handy because people just forget they're there. Because you can find that interviewers, especially when you're out and about and you just grab people unprepared, they can get a bit intimidated when you shove a mic in their face, and they just kind of clam up a little bit. So having a little lapel mic or a lavalier mic, they're called sometimes, that you can just clip to their shirt, and then you can hide the recorder away almost, and you can just have a conversation, just naturally, just chatting between yourselves, and that's a really handy way to do it when you're out and about.
And do you find generally that you have much necessity to actually do a lot of editing post-production after you've actually made the recording? Do you do things like taking out background noise, perhaps trying to improve the actual quality of the voice? Or is it more important just to focus on the quality of the recording to begin with and just refrain from doing that post-production editing?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to try and get the best quality possible up front, because it's generally, it is possible to process audio afterwards, and it is possible to make bad audio sound a bit better, but it's never really possible to make bad audio sound good. Whereas with just about planning, with just about a thought, you can always get good audio in any context. I mean, even if you're in a really loud, well, possibly not really loud then, that's possibly exaggerating, but even if you're in quite a busy space, a conference hall or something like that, it actually just adds a bit of atmosphere. As long as you have thought about a way to get the microphones close enough to yourself and the interviewee's mouths so that you are definitely creating a bit of space in terms of volume between your own voice and the background noise. Background noise can actually create some really good atmosphere, some really good texture to a recording. So yeah, put a bit of thought into it and you can get some great audio and not worry too much about trying to remove that type of stuff.
That's an interesting comment, that that it is possibly sometimes more natural to have that little bit of background noise instead of just having or trying to get absolute silence.
Yeah, it creates a really good bit of variety in your podcast, actually. If you're recording yourself as an intro, so you're just talking about yourself with silence in the background, obviously, and then you segue to something else, it creates that nice little I don't know, transition to somewhere different. You can, like, the listener's taken with you. They're taken to this outside place, a different atmosphere, a different, and it's quite a nice way to add variety to any podcast. In fact, on many radio shows and documentaries, they'll record an interview, they'll record a segment whereby somebody's in a studio and they're saying something or they're talking to somebody else, and then they'll actually add that recording, that background noise afterwards. They call it actuality, because it makes it sound like, you know, it's more, well, I don't know, more actual, more real, because there's stuff in the background, so they add that in afterwards to add that atmosphere.
It's quite incredible, actually, the way that podcasts are going at the moment, because going back about maybe just 3-4 years ago, it was just generally someone with a small headset on, and over the last couple of years, people have become more professional with the types of recording equipment they use. But just over the last year or so, possibly led by the States a little bit more, you've got series like Serial and Startup really making hyper-professional productions with all those segments you're talking about in them. And also different series of episodes as well. Instead of actually just doing episode 1 to right the way up to several hundred, you've got
Yes.
series stopping after a while, and you've done that a little bit with Podcraft, of course.
Indeed, yeah. I prefer the series approach, just because it's got so many advantages in that you can have a themed series, so you can talk about the same theme over 4 or 5 episodes. It guides your listeners through it so much more effectively, because you're not just chopping and changing every single episode. It's something different. You can package it up afterwards, so it can have a series on podcast equipment, and then you can just go and get those 4 or 5 episodes and you know exactly where they are. Plus, it gives you a chance to have a break. So you're not like 52 weeks of the year you're releasing a podcast episode. You can say, okay, that's series 2 finished, I'm going to have a month break, and then I'm going to be back with series 3, and it lets your audience know that that's happening, and there's a sort of clear break that gives you that chance to, you know, have a bit of downtime and maybe plan for the next one, so you're not just rushing to keep up the whole time.
Absolutely. There's lots of other topics that we could talk about in relation to podcasting, but it would be great to have also your opinion on how that relates to digital marketing in general. So
Yeah, sure.
let's segue over to the second section of our discussions. That focuses more on your thoughts on how digital marketing in general has evolved. So starting off with
Software I couldn't live without.
So what software do you currently use in your business that if someone took away from you, it would significantly impact your marketing success?
Well, I'll start with the obvious one, which is my audio editing package, which is Audacity. So Audacity is just a package that helps you cut together your podcast, take out the bad bits, process it to make it sound a bit better. So if somebody removed Audacity from my computer, I'd be a little bit stuck. I also use Audition as well, which is the more professional version. But actually, Audacity just does absolutely fine most of the time, and it's completely free.
That's interesting you say that, because I use Audacity myself as well, and you hear so many people say, yes, Audition is where it's at, but I'm glad to hear you say that Audacity is fine.
No, absolutely. I always recommend people just start with Audacity and play around with that. And the sort of advantage of moving up to Audition is that it helps your workflow, essentially. It doesn't have... For the average podcaster, there's not really many tools in there that Audacity doesn't have at all. It just makes it quicker and easier. It makes your whole production process a little bit more efficient, I suppose.
Okay. Slightly more challenging question. What piece of software are you not using at the moment, but you've heard good things about and you intend to try at some point in the near future?
I think, do you know what? I am a bit of I'm always trying to be a bit more organised because I'm not the best at planning tasks and stuff like that. So task management is something I've played around with for ages, trying to figure out how to manage my tasks. And especially now I'm working with some assistants a little bit more as well. So I'm contracting out a little bit more work. So I need to manage projects. So I've played with a bunch of different tools. And the most recent one I've come across, which I really want to try out, it looks absolutely brilliant and I hear great things about it, is All Things, which is a task management system. It's aimed at software development teams, I think, primarily, but actually it's been used by tons of people. I'm kind of talking about it because I heard about it through a group that I'm a part of, and there's a few guys in there just swear by it. So that's one I'm going to check out, and it's just going to, hopefully it'll help me streamline my task management and get everything organised a bit more effectively.
Okay, great. Well, I'll include links to Audacity and All Things on the show notes on digitalmarketingradio.com. But moving on to...
I wish I would have.
So I'd like you to look back on the very first day that you're involved in trying to market a business online. What didn't you do so well? What do you wish that you would have done differently?
I think the biggest mistake I made at the start was assuming that because it was digital marketing, because it was online marketing, that I could do it all digitally, all by email, touch of, was get out there and talk to people. do the personal thing and actually get along to networking meetings, get out there and get on the phone and talk to people and just actually meet folk personally, even like this. I mean, this is digitally, obviously, but we're having more a personal conversation where actually you can hear each other, you get a bit of personality, that type of thing. I think I got lost in the trying to build relationships by email, by Twitter, by Facebook, that kind of thing, forgetting the fact that it probably takes 100 tweets to gain the same kind of relationship as just one phone call, for example. And I'm getting so much more from my network, and I'm giving so much more to my network as well just nowadays because I'm actually going to conferences, I'm going to networking meetings, and I'm meeting people and finding out more about what they do and how I can help.
That's a great piece of advice. I think when you initially get into online marketing, you view it as something entirely different and perhaps an opportunity that doesn't relate to anything in the real offline world, but of course it does. And I think it's become generally slightly better. I think the quality of the content that's produced and the relationships that are necessary in order to build your own business are probably more important now than they used to be. But obviously it could get even better, and hopefully it will do in the future.
Yeah, I think it's just become a lot more professional these days, hasn't it? It's become more of a career as opposed to this strange job that people didn't really understand. So perhaps proper marketers...
My parents still don't understand what I do.
No, well, that's true, me neither. But I suppose perhaps maybe real market, well, that's not the right thing to say, not real marketers, traditional marketers, I should say, have come into the industry and maybe kind of shaken it up slightly, or I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely it's become more legitimate and more, getting out, maybe bringing in more of the old traditional methods, because you realise that just because they're not digital doesn't mean they don't work.
Exactly. I think bringing in the old methods than perhaps bringing in the old marketers, because a lot of the old marketers are perhaps have predefined notions of certain offline tactics that they should be focusing on, and they perhaps aren't willing to learn how to actually integrate digital technology with great marketing methods that have worked in the past. And I think you've got to marry them together and be willing to learn from you as well to a certain degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, moving on to
The this or that round.
So this is the quick response round. 10 quick questions here and just 2 rules. Try not to think about the answer too much, and you're only allowed to say the word both on 1 occasion. So, ready to go?
Okay, go for it.
Email or Twitter?
Email.
Audio or video?
Audio, of course.
Affiliates or display advertising?
Affiliates.
Facebook or Google Plus?
I hate Facebook, so Google Plus, just by default.
Online press releases or one-on-one relations?
Given my last answer, I suppose I have to say one-on-one relations.
Paid search or SEO?
SEO, I'd say, for the long term.
That was SEO, wasn't it? Okay, email,
Yes.
contact form or telephone number?
Telephone number.
Website or app?
Website, easy.
Social subscriber or email subscriber?
Email subscriber, much more valuable.
And local marketing or global marketing?
Oh, both. That'll be my both.
So this Facebook hatred, did that suddenly happen, or was that always there?
I think that gradually crept up on me, and I still use it for it. Do you know what? I say that, but it's really valuable in some ways. As in, I am a part of 2 or 3 communities on Facebook that I get a lot out of. For example, the UK Podcasters community, a brilliant community. Learned so much from that. As well as Chris Marr's Content Marketing Academy, which is a kind of local one. He's a marketer over in Fife that I know well.
Yes, and his podcast
so I get
very well.
Yes, indeed, definitely. So I get a lot out of it professionally, but just personally, it just I've basically withdrawn from it entirely personally, and partly the hatred comes from the fact that my wife never talks to me; she's just always on Facebook instead.
I have similar feelings actually. I feel like I'm in some kind of therapy group here, because I think it's also because obviously Facebook encouraged businesses to have their own pages, and then over the last year or so, it's actually significantly reduced the amount of organic footprint that those pages can actually get, and you have to really pay to actually drive traffic to people who have already liked you on Facebook. So that hasn't helped.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think the impression I get, I'm not expert on it, but the impression I get is it's just become, well, yeah, you kind of put so much effort into it over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, and now it's basically dropped off entirely.
The $10,000 question.
So if I was to give you $10,000 and you had to spend it over the next few days on a single thing to grow your business, what would you spend it on, and how would you measure success?
The single thing that I would spend it on is actually a single person, and that would be a content creator. I think if you gave me that money right now, what I would do is go out and basically give it to find somebody who was a great writer and could basically put themselves forward on audio or video, and I would get them to just create me content, great content for the next 6 months, because I think that I can't think of anything else that would bring more value just for buying it as such. I mean, I could talk about podcasting equipment till the cows come home. I could spend 10 grand on podcasting kit, no worries, but it wouldn't bring half as much value as $10,000 worth of written content, audio content, video content. So that's what I would buy a staff member for 6 months to create me a whole bunch of great stuff.
I guess the biggest challenge with that is being able to define its true value and actually measure its impact. Because, of course, you could spend quite easily $10,000 on pay-per-click advertising and be much more likely to measure the true value of each click in terms of any goals that you'd set up. But of course, content, you put content out there and it may benefit you immediately. It may take months to perhaps get different rankings and or get word of mouth about your brand out there. So it's much more challenging to measure the impact of that. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's definitely a long game, isn't it? You invest time into writing articles. You invest like 4 hours into writing a 2,000-word article that you pour your heart and soul into, and then you put it out there, and then you get basically silence back. But then that's happened to me so many times, and then a month later, suddenly a trickle of comments start coming in on that article, and then 2 months later, you get tons of feedback, and suddenly it's shared on Twitter, that type of stuff. So it's hard to measure it directly and certainly immediately, but I think that's where certainly the success of my site, the Podcast Host, has come from. So the Podcast Host has a load of articles on how to podcast, teaching people how to podcast, equipment, that kind of stuff. And that was really, I mean, that started out as a hobby 5 or 6 years ago when I was just helping to teach podcasting at university. But over the years, a lot of those articles were ranking for pretty competitive podcasting terms, and nowadays my business is built on the traffic that those articles bring in 5-6 years down the road. And I realise that's not exactly probably inspiring to people who want to build themselves a business quickly, but you can do it quicker. That's just a kind of example of not even trying, I suppose. So yeah, I suppose, sorry, that probably doesn't answer your question around measuring of it, but I think a lot of content marketing is partially built on the faith that creating great content is going to bring those visitors and that traffic and that engagement over the longer term.
It's tough. You know, we're all struggling with the answer to that. We know in our guts that it's valuable for the long term, but defining a value to that, I don't suppose will ever be really possible. But if businesses want to be very focused on last click and measuring everything, then they won't really be taking full advantage of the most effective modern digital marketing method. So it's all advantage to people like us, I guess.
Indeed. I suppose it depends if it's part of your funnel. I try to treat content marketing as the start of my funnel. So people come in, they find an article, they read it, they get some value, and at the end of the article I try and convince them to sign up to my email list. Which is then hopefully going to let me give them much more valuable content, persuade them to listen to my podcast, that type of stuff. So I can generally source, if that is, assuming that's the case, if they start off in an article, I can generally source where they came from on my email list, from what article they came from, because you can sort of fire that into MailChimp. It can say what the source form was, or a keyword on that source form. So there are ways, I think, to track where people come from with content marketing, but it's certainly trickier and it's not cut and dry, because they might have visited somewhere else first and then found you in an article and then direct typed in your URL, that type of stuff. So yeah, tricky.
Mm-hmm. Well, Colin, you've offered a lot of great advice in our conversation, so thanks for that. But what would you say is the number one takeaway? What's the single most important step that our listeners and viewers need to take away and implement in their own businesses?
Start a podcast.
And it needs to be. I mean, you said audio rather than video. Are you going to experiment with video a little bit more? Do you think, or do you think audio is the most effective medium for you in the foreseeable future?
It's a funny question, actually, because I said flippantly audio just because I am a podcasting guy, so I have to say audio really when you ask me audio or video. But actually, I do a lot of video as well. I've got a pretty full up YouTube channel with quite a lot of tutorials around podcasting, quite a lot around software. So using Audacity, for example, I do quite a lot of videos around that. And also a lot of my training courses that I run on the Podcast Host and elsewhere, I'll do videos for them, just because audio is great for getting your personality across. And I think the big advantage of audio is that it can be consumed anywhere. And you get so much attention on audio because people can be doing something else, so they can be cooking but listening to you at the same time, so they'll actually listen to you for an hour or more. Whereas with a video, they're stuck at a computer, they're watching you, so you've only got them for, say, 5 to 10 minutes, unless you've got some great stuff. So I think that while that's the advantage of audio, you can get across even more information via video, and you can engage even more possibly by, body language and gestures and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a place for both, and I certainly use both. So even though I said audio, I still think that in some contexts video wins out, and I do use it in those contexts.
That's great. No, I'm glad you say that, because I like to use both as well. I mean, when I'm sitting at a desk and working on something and perhaps wanting a little bit of audio while I'm doing that, I'll maybe put on a podcast like Podcasters Roundtable, or maybe actually listen to an interview like Mixergy. So those are video-based interviews, and a lot of similar content that you can get on a podcast. But sometimes I actually like looking at the video and seeing someone's reaction to a question, and just that little bit of body language that sometimes tells you a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I say, you can engage slightly more with them just because of that. It adds the body language element. You're just possibly losing a little bit of flexibility in how people consume your material, I guess. That's the only downside, I would say.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I really hope that we can get a little bit of response in terms of listeners and watchers, and what version they prefer the most. Because with your audio, there's been just a little challenge with the video, just with you breaking out, but not enough to kind of stop you, because you're delivering a lot of good content, and you could obviously tell what you were saying. But with the audio version, we'll make sure that we have the great quality audio. So it'll be interesting to see if people prefer watching us and seeing our reactions, or actually listening to the slightly better quality. So that could be interesting.
Indeed. Great. Well, I suppose they always. Sorry, I was just going to say, they always say that you can get away with, what is it? You can get away with bad video and good audio much better than you can get away with good video and bad audio. For some reason, people hate listening to bad audio, but they don't mind watching bad video if it's accompanied by decent audio.
I completely agree with that. Although a lot of video producers don't seem to stick to that row, and it's just incredible how much video I see out there on YouTube, which is allegedly produced by professional organizations, but the audio is horrific.
Indeed.
But so thanks so much for your time and your information that you've offered us today. What is the best way for people who are listening and watching to actually reach out to you if they would like to?
Best place to find me is at thepodcasthost.com. That's my website, where all things podcasting, you can find everything I do there, or even just tweet me at thepodcasthost. So yeah, I would love to hear from either side. Yeah, just feedback on anything I've said. So yeah, happy to help.
Sounds great. Okay, well, thank you again, Colin.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Okay, well, we'll see you next time on. So thanks for joining us, and bye for now.